This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
We will begin with the Archbishop of Canterbury and a position that is looking to me, and I'm not normally very good at this, increasingly untenable. Calls for him to resign over his handling of a child sex abuse scandal are growing. And the collection of front pages this morning will have landed on the doormat at Lambeth Palace with a resounding thud. How do things like this happen?
James O'Brien on LBC.
I don't know how it works. This impulse that kicks in when you read about child sex abuse, that for most of us who have never held managerial positions or positions of power, your urge to seek justice, shine the light into the darkest corners is insuperable, right? It's huge. And yet if you are in charge, if you are in control, whether it's a school or whether it's the entire Church of England or whether it's, a scout group or a swimming troop, the urge to keep a lid on it seems to kick in even harder. We're going to talk about this today. It may not be easy, but I'm giving you a warning up front about the direction in which we are going. The Archbishop of Canterbury is, I like this head, well, like's not quite the right word. So the idea that he is paying the price for years of silence over the latest child abuse scandal is a helpful headline. If you're not across the facts, just give me a moment, if you would. And I think this is important. I know the Church of England is not the force it was, but it remains a crucial pillar of our society, or if you prefer a slightly more nuanced word, it remains a crucial pillar of our establishment. There is no suggestion whatsoever that Justin Welby himself has behaved in criminal or immoral. Well, immoral is a tough one, isn't it? Fashion. But he stands accused of having failed to act when made aware of disgusting behaviour by a member of the church. It is, make no mistake, the story of the church's most prolific child abuser and a story of how he was never brought to justice. Okay? So an independent report has found that in 2013, I think shortly after getting the job, the Bishop of Ely's safeguarding advisor told him in detail about the decades of abuse visited upon boys by a lawyer called John Smythe, an evangelical Christian camp leader. So you'd have summer camps and boys would go away, and that is where this man would prey upon them. And in 2013, shortly after getting the job, Welby was told by the Bishop of Ely safeguarding advisor what Smythe had been up to. Reviewers of the Makin report, which is what the independent report is called, have used the word unlikely to describe the Archbishop's insistence that he had, quotes, no awareness or suspicion of the abuse prior to 2013. The report itself concludes, on the balance of probabilities, it is the opinion of the reviewers of the report that it was unlikely that Justin Welby would have had no knowledge of the concerns regarding John Smythe in the 1980s in the UK. Now, were I a lawyer, which I am categorically not, I would point out that the insistence that you had no awareness or suspicion of abuse is not the same as the claim that you had no knowledge of concerns, but it's close enough. Semantics matter in these moments, oddly, because you can apologise without apologising. How many times have we examined the rhetoric of people who say, I'm sorry but, or I'm sorry if? It's not really an apology if you're only sorry but or sorry if. I'm sorry if I've caused offence. I'm not sorry for causing offence. And with the very real possibility that this story might develop while we're live on air, in other words, it may well be that Lambeth Palace make an announcement in the coming hours or in the coming minutes. And so I don't feel qualified fully qualified to comment or to invite you to comment on whether he should stay or whether he should go. I think he should probably go, but I don't know the contents of his soul, to use a religious term, and therefore I don't know whether there is much clear blue water between claiming no knowledge or no suspicion of abuse and no knowledge of concerns. They're not the same thing. But here is the point. Brian puts it very well. Brian puts it very well indeed. Welby is another victim of yet another institution that puts reputational damage limitation over the moral imperative. Another example, like the Met, like the Metropolitan Police being shown up as bereft of the ability to challenge establishment institutions. That's not fair on this occasion. The Met might fit the description that you describe in other areas, but the accusation being levelled at Welby is that he didn't refer it to the police, and if he had done, then he would have been brought to justice. He died overseas before justice had been done, or even had been seen to be done. This man, John Smythe, or John Smith, it's spelt with a Y. One of you telling me to pronounce it as Smith, but I've heard everyone else pronouncing it as Smythe all morning. I have some horrible insights into this notion of institutional. What is it we're going to call it? Self-protection. I've got one relatively trivial example, and I've got two or three horribly pertinent and relevant examples. You may not know this, but I attended a religious school where a number of monks were engaged in the sexual abuse of my peers. Not my close friends, and not necessarily a complete generational crossover, but certainly some of the monks who had done that were still active in the community while I attended the school, and it continued long after I left. Let me give you a little example. And this was the Catholic Church. They would move a paedophile monk to a parish. So they would remove him from the orbit of little boys like me, whose parents were paying large sums of money to send us to the school, and transplant them to a parish where he would be free potentially to prey, for example, upon altar servers or upon boys that came into his orbit from slightly different backgrounds. I think there was a huge amount of snobbery involved in that. But that's not particularly pertinent to this case. What is pertinent to this case is an experience I had at my previous school, at my prep school, where again there were two active paedophiles. And this is the bit, right? And I'm going to warn you in advance, or at least I'm going to crave your indulgence in advance, because I still get quite, as you'd expect, I still get upset about this when I think about what happened to my friends. And this was absolutely, do you know, I used to say on my watch, as if a 12-year-old boy could have done anything in the face of this level of adult obscenity and I think institutional cover-up, as if a 12-year-old boy could have done anything. But I still feel guilt. I still think we thought we knew. We didn't know for sure. One of them was using the photography darkroom to abuse boys. We thought, those of us who weren't in his who hadn't been targeted by him, we thought that they were just looking at pornography and drinking cider and having a naughty time of it. We did not know that they were being abused, but we knew it was wrong. And we knew who it was, we knew where it happened, we had a fair idea which boys were involved, and they couldn't talk to us about it because of the usual threats and what have you that had been deployed in that context, and the threats made to the victims. Again, do use WhatsApp and texts responsibly today. Do let me know if I use words inappropriately. I'm 52 years old. I have talked about these matters now for 30 years at least. 25 years at least. God, I told you about when I got the phone call, didn't I? God, that was a moment. I was walking over Westminster Bridge. I don't know why. My dad wasn't long dead. So we're going back 12 years or so. My phone, I answer my phone. It's an unrecognised number. And a woman introduces herself as being from West Midlands Police. Kidderminster Police Station, in fact, where I had a couple of unpleasant experiences that we'll save for a different day. And I start, you know what you do. You happily, I didn't think, oh my God, what have I been caught doing, which I might have thought 10, 20 years previously. But I went through in my head what she might be ringing me about. And my first thought was that it was linked to my dad's death, because that was the biggest, and that he'd left his car in a multi-story car. But do you know what I mean? Something utterly stupid and banal, but it must be linked to Dad, because the only massive thing that's happened in my life recently is Dad dying. And therefore, and then she said, I'm phoning you about, I'm not going to say the name of the school because it's changed hands now. It's a completely different institution. It has the same name, but none of the same people are involved. So that wouldn't be fair. I'm phoning you about so-and-so school. You've probably been waiting for this phone call for years. And I had to stop on the bridge. And I thought, God, yeah. And I said, is it about Mr. O'Brien? Bizarrely, he had the same name as me. Just a quick word to the lawyers. He was sent to jail. Don't worry. There's no danger here of defamation or even similar. And I said, is it about him? And she said, yes. And also another teacher. And she said a boy had come into the police station decades later, just walked into the police station, partly as a consequence of the atmosphere that changed briefly with regard to child sexual abuse in this country in the aftermath of Jimmy Savile and other very, very high-profile famous offenders, and the reporting, I think in part some of the reporting that Andrew Norfolk did with regard to grooming gangs and girls not being believed when they came forward. And there was a brief window when victims were told they would be believed and that if they came forward, the wheels of justice would work in their favour. And tragically, one of the main reasons why that window shut again was because one of the cases that became a sort of cause célèbre for believing victims, for believing accusers, the accuser turned out not to be telling the truth. A man who was known as Nick when his accusations were being made, and later turned out to be a paedophile himself called Carl Beach, and the Operation Midland officers who described his allegations as credible and true contributed to an opportunity for people to shut down that window. And you know, there are good reasons, I guess, for it. People who are falsely accused at a very high profile have unimaginable horrors to endure. But that moment was the kind of moment in which this boy could walk into a police station and think, you know what, I'm going to tell the truth about what happened to me 30 years ago, because I think that it might actually achieve something. For the first time in my life, I think it might actually achieve something. And they went absolutely great guns. It was extraordinary. They contacted everybody. The first question she asked me, of course, was whether or not I had been abused. And at that moment, I thought, God, imagine how those lads feel today. I just had to stop and lean against the barrier on the side of the bridge. I felt my legs go a bit funny, because this is something that we've all carried. But all I carried was knowledge and a little bit of Catholic guilt about the ludicrous notion that I, as a 12-year-old, could have done more. But adults are involved in all of these stories. Adults who were not abusers are involved in all of these stories. The first thing we say when we get together, and it's a pretty scant silver lining, and there are obviously places we don't go to and questions we don't ask each other, but we've re-established contact partly through social media and latterly partly in person. Some of the boys went back for a visit to the school, which I couldn't make. It was your fault, actually. I couldn't get the time off work. And you the first thing we ask each other is, they must have known. Other teachers, other adults must have known. There was a teacher who left. He was really popular, and no one could understand why he left. And I look back and I think to myself, I think you knew. And I think you couldn't countenance staying. I don't know whether you had spoken to Anybody senior, anybody in authority at the school, and been unsatisfied with the response that you received? But you didn't go to the police. Nobody did. It was normal, if that's an appropriate word to use in this context. It was commonplace for people to know. And listen, if you're my age and you're struggling with this from a position of skepticism or cynicism, it's quite helpful to remember nicknames. Boarding schools are hideous places when these kind of characters have found a role within them, have found a home within them. But this wasn't a boarding school story, the Welby one, but it was residential. It was when they were on residential camps that it would happen. But the access to children can be through sport, of course, football stories, from all those stories that came out in that little window of treating accusers as honest, believing their allegations before it was slammed shut again in the aftermath of Operation Midland. All of those scandals that were really gathering pace, and almost all of which were not built on lies and false allegations, they all spoke to access, quite often residential. Boys would stay over at the home of a football coach. And you look at what other adults knew, and you know that they looked away. And the reason I mention cynicism and skepticism and nicknames is because all environments had nicknames. Every generation of children had a teacher who was known as, Pervy Perkins or Dodgy Dave. Every school, right? It's not every school. Everywhere where adults had access to children, there was someone who had a reputation, which was commonplace, is a better word than normal. And I think it's 12-year-old me that wants to ask today's question. We will watch and wait to see what happens to Justin Welby, who I have met and by whom I was deeply impressed. I wasn't across the detail of this story when I met him, and full disclosure generally is not an interview environment in which we hold people's feet to the fire. But he's the first man in 20 years the first man since Dad died 12 years ago, who's made me think deeply about God, actually, for whatever that's worth. And I appreciate it won't be worth much to you, possibly. Hansy Harold, Dan says, everyone's got one. Everyone's got one. I don't know why the adults don't do anything. I don't know why the grown-ups don't blow the whistle. I still don't. I didn't then, and I don't now. Why don't the grown-ups do more in these situations? And I don't want a catalogue of condemnation, because I don't think that would be helpful. I think if a 12-year-old boy can carry a sense of guilt that he didn't do more, what the hell does an adult carry? An adult who didn't do more. Why don't the grown-ups do more? I didn't come across, and the other story I had, sorry, I know this is long, but it's quite important. The other story I had was of a completely different order and not in any way comparable, but it speaks to institutional protection. When me and my mates got thrown out of that school where monks were routinely abusing children for the appalling crime of smoking cannabis, the speed with which the school authorities sought to absolve themselves of any responsibility, to claim that we'd been exposed to bad influences outside the school, to claim that it had absolutely nothing to do with the school. Now, I was growing up on a farm in Worcestershire. There was no earthly way I could have accessed the kind of individuals that we accessed on our weekends over the wall in the city of York. But the school moved so quickly to tell all the other parents that we were the problem, to impute that our parents had been negligent or lax, to wash their hands of all responsibility, even as they were complicit in the cover-up of epic child sex abuse. Incredible, right, when you think about it. But I still don't know. I can see him now. There was one moment, and I can't tell you about this because it's already 22 minutes after 10, but there was one moment where I came perilously close to blowing the lid off the whole thing by accident. And I think of that moment. I thought of it a lot when these stories started breaking. Why don't the adults do anything? Is it the same reason I didn't? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. Why don't the adults do anything? Justin Welby told in 2013 about Smythe. He claims that prior to that he had no awareness or suspicion, but subsequent to that he did, and he did nothing. Why don't they do anything? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. My apologies for the length of this, but I'm not sure I could have done it any shorter. It's 10:23.
James O'Brien on LBC.
25 minutes after 10, not for the first time. The difference between excuse and explain is crucial here. I'm not excusing anything, but I want to understand why so many adults for so long have betrayed so many children by not blowing the whistle on child sex abusers, on paedophiles, not reporting it, not taking it further. I understand what the phrase reputational damage means. I also understand the need for mandatory reporting, which has not a challenge that has not been met in the aftermath of the child sex abuse inquiry. But drawing, if you can, perhaps on experience, Justin Welby is not a bad man. The abuser is a bad man, was a bad man, but Welby has done a very bad thing. And when good men do bad things, I see question marks. And that's why I'm asking you today the question that I'm asking you today. Just to the point I made earlier about nicknames, James sent in a text that couldn't have been more on point. He says, I'm a youth worker. I once went to the police about a colleague I was suspicious about. The police said, what first alerted you? And I responded honestly that the kids call him Pedo Dave. So that just encapsulates the point I was making about the if you think, I could never look the other way, or that means you've never come across a nickname like that, and just inquired a little bit further. John's in Ballymena in Northern Ireland. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, good morning, James.
Hello,
First-time caller and all that. Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you. I come quickly. I've got a couple of points to make, but I come from a background of boarding school in the 1960s, 70s, and had trouble with a music master who tried to have his wicked way with me quite mildly. And I understand it does cast a complete shadow over your life. Whether it's dealt with or not. But the point I want to make is that Justin Welby has form on this. He comes from, he actually made the same statements about Paula Reynolds. He said that when she was shortlisted to be Bishop of London, and all that furore broke, he was a supporter of her.
I understand the point you're making. I'm not, and unless you're going somewhere I can't currently perceive, I'm not 100% comfortable with conflating his failure to. I mean, we're talking about the post office scandal, right?
Yes, we are. But I'm saying that he what he said was he should have asked more questions.
But that would only have prevented her from becoming a bishop. It wouldn't have done anything to save.
It's not the same here, but it's the same thing happening. I think.
Oh, okay. So you don't ask questions because you don't want to hear the answers.
No, that's right. Because a vicar said it very well last night, and your producer said to me, "Why don't adults deal with it?"
Yes.
And the vicar said on Channel 4 News last night, he said he made the mistake of protecting the good of the institution and not paying attention to the individuals involved. The other thing I wanted to say, if I may, is that I know this from first hand because I was involved 30 years ago with whistleblowing on a particular church in London who were allegedly embezzling a large amount, £75,000 of educational trust money.
Gosh.
And to cut a long story short...
If you would.
I would.
I mean only for legal reasons. I don't want detail. You can take as long as you want.
I say, look, I don't want to... all I want to say is that when we took it to the Charity Commissioners and the diocese, they said, there's nothing, we're not going to do anything about it because the church produces its quota every year, and self-interest and fear of exposure. Did you report your music teacher to anyone, John? No, I was too young. I mean, he got sacked. Somebody else was a bit bolder than me.
I'm sorry.
I would now.
How old are you?
I'm 71 now.
Okay.
Well past that.
Well, as in the abuser's probably dead. I wasn't suggesting necessarily that you did that. I was just highlighting that for your generation and for my generation and possibly for some younger generations, but hopefully not all, it's possible to talk as coolly as John did about sexual assault or attempted sexual assault in a way that I don't think our children would now. I think that they would be more likely. I know this stuff still goes on, but the normalisation of it must be a cousin of the cover-up. You couldn't have done the normalising without doing the cowardice, the failure, the institutional protection. I don't know. And listen, I'll take this all day long. Maybe I'm wrong when I say that he's not a bad man. Maybe what he's done makes him a bad man. I am allowed my opinion, and Mids, you are allowed yours. And they are at the moment very different, but I certainly am not arrogant enough to insist that you're wrong and I'm right. Jenny Barsby has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 10 is the time. I cannot obviously read out all the messages that come into the programme on a day like today. I can't do it on any day, but I can only do my best to read them all. I'll stick around afterwards, particularly in case there's something that possibly demands more attention from outside this studio to work my way through them. But sometimes, and I think this is a really good example, the one I'm going to read out now, I think sometimes writing it down can be quite therapeutic and quite helpful. Sometimes, and we used to do a lot in this space, we used to do an awful lot in this space, in that little window when society seemed ready to tell victims that they would be believed before it was slammed shut by the horrors of Operation Midland and Carl Beach. But it did help a lot of people, just sometimes to share even in print rather than on air, stuff they'd never shared before. So this is, I think, a good example of that. I was, and trigger warnings all over the place on today's show, obviously. I was abused as a child by our church choir master in Redhill. He was touchy-feely with me as a chorister, and also when he taught me piano in our own home. As kids, we all discussed it. We even joked about it, but nothing ever happened. My mum and the vicar's wife were both social workers. They must have known, but they did nothing. I had that phone call from the police when I was working in York in the 1990s, probably 1992. I went in to give a statement in the police station. It was cathartic. It allowed the floodgates to open. I hadn't realised what I'd bottled up until I went through it all as a witness. He was weakly disciplined by the church, told to behave himself, and then went on to abuse more children. At this point, the police got involved and he was sentenced to prison. I am tempted to call in. It's the first time I've ever thought that. You don't need to, mate, unless you want to. Plenty of people have and will, but the question of why don't the adults do anything? And can you be sure that you would? Can you be 100% sure that you would? Susan's in Chippenham. Susan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James, and
Hello.
thanks so much. It's a very, very live conversation, actually, in my family at the moment.
Oh, God, I'm sorry.
I'm really pleased we're having this conversation because, unlike cancer, unlike miscarriage, we don't talk about child sexual abuse. So I disclosed to my family last year. I had a step-parent who abused me for 6 years. And my question has been for 23 years since that abuse stopped. Did my other parent know and choose to do nothing, or did they not know and they should have known? And I can't answer that. I've asked them. In fact, we had a very difficult conversation not only a week ago, because I'm now going through a type of trauma therapy called EMDR.
Okay. Is it helping? Is it working?
It's incredibly traumatic.
Yes. Is that like brain spotting? Is that when you focus on the...
Yeah, so you can either use a light, a finger, or buzzers.
Yes, I know what. Yeah, I'm familiar with EMDR.
It stimulates rapid eye movement. So
it's an extraordinary practice, isn't it? An extraordinary therapy. I really hope it works for you, but it's not easy while you're in it, is it?
No, it's a very intense, traumatic process which recalls memories and tries to desensitize them. Exactly. But you have to go through the most traumatic process, Susan. Obviously. But, it's difficult, isn't it? How do you verbalise? The response I had from my parent last week was, you kept it a secret, I didn't know.
Right. Did you feel that they were trying to blame you for that? They were almost trying to pass some of the guilt onto you, or not? There's
definitely a narcissistic,
okay,
character there that, when I'm struggling, like I did last week after the therapy,
yes,
they like to play the victim that,
I'm sorry.
I should have known, I should have done something. It was my fault. I brought them into the home.
Yeah.
But, equally, when the perpetrator insisted on taking me on holiday by myself, away from my siblings and my other parent, when they would tuck me in at night for 2 hours, where was the other parent?
Yeah.
Because, whilst I was being abused, they were having Rolexes.
I see.
And nice holidays. So, was it...
Can you know? Can you know and not know? Is that what we're kind of addressing? You can know and not know. You can choose. Yes.
Not to know.
That's much better put than I managed. You can choose not to know, and that's probably what we're talking about. And I think glad is the wrong word, but I'm glad that you have rung in today, because your situation is much more commonplace than the than some of the sort of big ticket, big headline stories that we hear about. Yours is the normal. Yours is the more commonplace experience of child sexual abuse, isn't it? So it's a family member, it's in the home. And yet the same principles apply, the same questions apply about choosing not to know.
But the impact of choosing not to know, so having that holiday, having that nice car, having whatever that affords you, this is the effects for me. The only way I can describe it is like a cancer.
Yeah.
It is eating me from the inside out. I can't talk to, people about it, because talking about, a cancer diagnosis or a miscarriage, they are absolutely awful situations, but we do talk about them, and it's uncomfortable and we don't know what to say. But try talking to someone who's been sexually abused. It's very isolating, it's very lonely, it's very traumatic addressing it. And, the average person takes 23 years. That's what the statistics say.
To come forward.
Years to yeah.
That's right, yeah. I mean, and I mean, I'm sure you already know this, but there are support groups, and there are places where you can talk to people who've been through similar, but that's not what you're describing. You're describing friends and even family members who would just cross the road, metaphorically speaking, rather than discuss these things with you, rather than let you get some stuff out there that you need to get out there.
Yeah, all of these conversations are extremely difficult, and, part of my choosing not to disclose was because I didn't want to hurt my family. Now,
can we take that, do you think, and apply it to the people who choose not to know? Part of their motivation is not wanting to blow their family up as well, except that they are then using your suffering as part of their self-negotiation process. They've got no right to do that. You use your suffering, stay silent about your suffering to protect the family unit, and there's a tragic, heartbreaking logic to that, but it's a very different thing from using somebody else's suffering as a bargaining chip in your own ruminations, isn't there? In your own decision-making processes.
I just think the result of that, and, other people may have a very different experience. They may have had successful therapy and come out the other end, but I haven't had children, James, because I don't feel I could keep a child safe. Oh, dear.
I'm so sorry. I that's just awful, and it's grossly unfair, and it's not the be-all and the end-all of your existence, but it's an injustice on a scale that is almost impossible to contemplate from the outside, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Well, the only thing, can I just say, I have a fantastically supportive partner who sat with me last week when I was in an absolute state where I couldn't, I become overwhelmed post the therapy. I can't talk to him about it. I don't sleep at night.
Yeah.
But yeah, he has been amazing.
Good. You deserve it. Of that we can all agree. I want to try and make you smile before you go. I'll do that next. But before, and obviously, I really hope that the therapy works. I don't have personal experience of that specific type of therapy, but I know people who do, and the stories are almost all good. But what we are describing here, in the Justin Welby case and in your life, is other people making calculations about your suffering and coming to the wrong conclusion, isn't it? And coming to the conclusion that your suffering is not important. Well, here it is. It's not important enough to jeopardize that stuff over there, whether it's nice holidays and a Rolex watch, or whether it is the status, the probity, and the reputation of the Church of England. It's the same thing. Are you familiar with how my inbox works on this program, Susan?
No.
No. So whatever the subject is, whatever the topic, whatever the weather, somebody will find something to complain about. So I have been asked to point out it's 26 years to come forward on average, and there is actually a charity called Clinic 26.
Noted.
Which is not necessarily the most important point to have made, but I hope it briefly distracted you from what you've been thinking about prior to making this call. My thanks to Paul for bringing that to our attention. 10:44 is the time, and there it is. That experience, and I've spoken to people like Susan before, but you always learn something, don't you? That's what it is. And I know this might be obvious, but it's exactly the same, whether it's in the context of a teenage girl's home or the entire Church of England. These adults who choose not to know, or who choose, while knowing, not to do anything, are making a calculation about your suffering, about that child's suffering, and deciding that giving them justice, giving them closure, giving them support is not as important as protecting the reputation of the parish priest, the reputation of the entire Church of England, the economic situation of the household, the access to nice holidays and a nice lifestyle. Everywhere you turn where an abused child has been let down by an adult other than the abuser, I think you will find that calculation. And I think you think that too now.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. I think, like me, you may have remembered a call we took earlier this year from Margaret in Catterick, who spoke about, it was an extraordinary call. I just refreshed my memory on some of the details, because she was a teacher herself formerly. I don't know whether that is relevant to what happened next, but I mean, as with Susan a moment ago, it was one of those calls where you you won't forget it. And she was putting together the menus for a dinner party. Do you remember? And her husband was away, and she used his computer, and came across images of child sexual abuse. And the way she described it, you could almost feel those first few seconds where she couldn't compute what was in front of her. She just sort of couldn't quite work out what it was that she was seeing, and then it became absolutely unignorable. And in that moment, she blew the whistle. She blew up her own life, effectively. I thought of it because of what Susan said about her parent who didn't abuse her, potentially knowing that the other parent was, or certainly not making any effort at all to explore suspicions that must or should have been present. And that certain knowledge, witnessing, would perhaps propel you to a slightly different place. But at 10:49 this morning, 12-year-old me is asking why the adults who know don't do anything. And it's a pretty grim and cynical answer, isn't it? But I think it applies, as we said a moment ago, everywhere from the top of the Church of England right the way through to the family homes of teenage or younger boys and girls. If someone is making a calculation, and on one side of the scales is your suffering, and on the other side of the scales is their reputation or their life or their company or their welfare or their public image or whatever you want to call it. I should clarify for anyone just tuning in that 12-year-old me is asking this question on behalf of his friends, not because I was unfortunate enough to fall into the clutches of the many, many paedophiles who taught in both of the schools that I went to from the ages of 7 to 18. 10 to 11 is the time. Mark is in Milton Keynes. Mark, what would you like to say?
Well, firstly, I think I'd say that doesn't Susan's suffering bring the subject into sharp relief?
Yes, it really does.
And I think from sort of indirect personal experience, James, so these people, as you call them, whether they're archbishops or head teachers, I suspect they're caught in a vicious circle of guilt by association and their personal credibility being called into question. And my example is my daughter attended a primary school. She's a woman in her 30s now, but this would be 25 years ago. And some 15, must be nearly 20 years later, she was away. 2 policemen, detectives, came to the house and asked after Lydia. They said, this is her address. I said, what's it about? And they said, well, she was taught in the primary school by a particular teacher. And I said, oh, yes, I remember him. By the way, he's subsequently in prison for his offences, so it's in the public domain. And I said, what's it all about? They said, well, we'd like to get in touch with her. And I said, well, do explain. And they said, well, we'll come back and have an appointment.
Yeah.
And what had happened was that he'd been moved sideways to another school and subsequently stayed in the education system for another 15 years or so. And he'd been accused of inappropriately touching children, I think somewhere like Nottingham. And the story was in the public domain, and that he was acquitted. And the judge reprimanded the prosecution for heinously bringing this good man's name into ill repute, and it was unfair, etc., etc. And by chance, so another parent of my daughter's peer group caught the news article and said, hang on a minute, we had worries about this guy years ago. And this mother contacted the local police, who subsequently, Thames Valley Police, I mean, all credit to them, they commenced what led to nearly a 2-year investigation where they tracked down every child that he'd had contact with during his tenure at this school. Whether some of these kids they were friends of my daughter, some of them were in Australia working and all over the world, as you'd imagine.
Yes.
But to cut to the chase, my daughter was interviewed. She'd been given, I mean, my ex-wife and I used to say, oh, yes, he's giving her private piano lessons at lunchtime. God. What a nice man, isn't that good?
Yeah.
And it transpired that she was sitting on his lap to play piano, and we don't think he touched her, and my daughter's fairly forthright, and she says she wasn't. She's unaffected by it all, but clearly other kids came off worse.
Yeah.
Big investigation, Aylesbury Crown Court, 2-3 years ago, I suppose, he was sentenced to getting on for 10 years imprisonment. But the point is that,
they moved the problem. They moved it onto someone else's patch.
Quite.
For the same reasons that we've been examining, because the alternative would have been reputational damage, or possibly just a hassle, a big hassle, Well,
there we are. And I remember when he left, saying to the head teacher, well, what happened to him? He seemed to be okay. And she said, well, he was a young teacher. He got emotionally involved with the children too much, and he's moved on. And with the benefit of hindsight, I look back and I think, you miserable person, you probably knew damn well what he was up to, and you washed your hands. And
you've put the enormous emotional and intellectual effort into convincing yourself that you did nothing wrong, which inevitably bleeds into trying to convince other people. Thank you, Mark. Henry Mance is a journalist I admire very much on the Financial Times, and he has done something that not many journalists covering this story have done, which is to read that, well, actually, no, he says, I've only read bits of the report. I have read bits of the report, but this is a crucial bit that possibly gives some support to Justin Welby's position. And I mention this because of the news story that has inspired this conversation. He was advised Welby was advised that a police referral had been made. He was also advised that the local authority had been informed. Neither of these proved to be the case, but it is reasonable to conclude that Justin Welby had been assured that these steps had been taken. He was also told via his personal chaplain that the South African church had been alerted. That is the place to which this abuser had moved. Justin Welby later said that he had personally written to the primate in Cape Town, but he had not done so, and he later again said that he had got confused and has misremembered what had actually happened at the time. So he was given duff information about whether or not a police referral had been made, which is perhaps missing from some of the coverage that you've seen, that I've seen today. 10:55 is the time. Jules is in Lancaster. Jules, what made you pick up the phone?
What made me pick it up, James, was the fact that I nearly didn't call, because that, well, what can I do feeling, and, is my contribution to be very good? And I think that just rolls back. But my main answer was going to be legal. Not only reputational, but depending what organisation it is, just that fear of being taken through the courts, the implication for compensation. Yeah. And my example relates back to football, which I've assured your your producer, I won't mention any names. It is all in the public domain, but a very high-profile case where a coach was abusing.
I think you can mention his name. It's good that my producer is erring on the side of caution, but don't worry. If we're talking about Barry Bennell, he was found guilty of 43 child sex offences and then died in jail. Yeah. So I'm comfortable that we can talk about. We can say his name on the radio. And you covered that, did you? I don't want
to mention some of the players who obviously had to come out on a very high-profile TV show. And but going back, 25 years. I mean, I'd been a supporter of this club for 40, right. And we had regular little taunts from the opposition supports, making jibes and jokes about the club as to what our manager and coaches were doing, and it was either just brushed off or laughed off. But we all asked questions, and then just a project I was doing over 25 years ago, I remember asking, one of the very senior people at the club while I was just interviewing, what is the truth behind this? And, what have you guys ever done?
There's so much smoke. Is there any fire? And
it was just, there was just that look in his eyes when I talked to him. And obviously I couldn't then do anything more about it. I just wanted to put my own mind at rest. With a personal angle, I had a couple of nephews who then, played for this club. And I remember asking one of them point blank, because, they were going over and staying at a house after coaching.
Right.
And just dismissed it completely to me. No, nothing ever happened, nothing. And then just another project, I sat with one of the players who came out on TV.
Yeah.
And he couldn't admit it or talk about it.
Oh, bless him.
And his dad was sat in the same room when we chatted. He was only a young player. He was a 19-year-old, I think, when I interviewed him for one of the... And just to add absolute insult, his dad worked at the club. And,
So we've talked...
So I just asked... I asked myself, did I just not do enough? And...
there are people that knew for sure. There are people who must have known for sure, and they did nothing. We spend a lot of time on this program talking about people willfully believing things that they must know not to be true. Whether it's in the context of conspiracy theories or politics, and in some ways there's crossover, isn't there? The more you've got to lose by the truth coming out, the more you psychologically, perhaps, build the barricades against the truth, even telling it to yourself, Jules. Because if you did that, then all bets are off. It's why I thought of Margaret blowing up her own life the minute she found those images on her husband's computer. You can understand that a lesser woman would have heard voices, and I hope that's not an unfair word to use, would have heard the voice of saying, well, hang on a minute. You're going to have to move house. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to suffer the shame of the neighbours. No, all of the things that go on the other side of the scales, they kick in all of these contexts, whether it's the Church of England, whether it's a football club, or whether it's, your husband's computer, or whether it's a child's bedroom. The same calculations all the time. I'd never seen it that clearly before, actually. And I'll tell you something you've reminded me of. The move for, the calls for mandatory or mandatory reporting, which can be a confusing phrase, but it literally means that if it were proved that someone who knew did nothing, they would be culpable. That would itself become an offence. And it was one of the big takeaways from the child sex abuse inquiry. And I know, because I've got friends in this field, that they feel very let down by the failure to implement and the failure to move forward in this very specific field. They also feel, and this is a conversation for another day, that some children's charities have been less than helpful in that space. But if you want to take anything away from this hour and the way in which we chose to conduct this conversation, just find out a little bit more about mandatory reporting, because I think it's crucial. And I think unless something does move in that space, we'll be having conversations like this for decades hence. It's 11 o'clock.
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. Thank you. Thank you for helping all of us to create a space on the radio where we can have a conversation like the one we just had in the last hour. And thank you also for your kind words about how we managed to conduct it. It is we're very much one of those subjects that needs to be talked about, but it is, as some of the callers highlighted perfectly, not a conversation that is easy to start. Well, I suppose this one is similarly serious as well. And something a bit weird has happened to me with regard to this story. You may have noticed I always make the very arrogant mistake of thinking that you pay almost as much attention to what comes out of my mouth as perhaps not as I do. I could probably pay a little bit more, but obviously you don't. So obviously you don't have. Some people do. That's what's misleading. So if I say something like, "What was the name of that person who rang me in 2006?" and I made them do pigeon impressions live on the radio during Mystery Hour, and you go, "Oh, that was Bob. That was Bob in Gateshead." And I'll check the archives, if such a thing exists, and it'll turn out you were right. So I get misled, but obviously, most of the time, I'm burble in the background for you. And you're not keeping notes. You're not taking notes or keeping a record of what's going on. Even people who work with me don't listen to much of the stuff. But put your hand down, Keith. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. I mention that because you may not have noticed. You probably haven't noticed that I'm in a right dither about the assisted dying business. And part of the reason for that really came into focus today. I used to tell you, when I was a schoolboy debater, and the subjects that would come up again and again, some of them I thought had been done and dusted forever, right? Abortion, for example, partly because I went to a Catholic school, but even when I went on tour and visited non-Catholic schools, abortion was a hardy perennial of the debating society. It was a debating society staple in the 1980s and earlier, possibly the 1990s. So was IVF, actually. That probably was a Catholic thing. But the death penalty was another absolute crackerjack. That seems to have died the death. What else? Private schools. The hardy perennials of the sixth form debating society. Assisting dying wasn't one of them, but it later became one of them. So by the time I was debating on the telly instead of debating in the sixth form, assisted dying had become one of the big things that we talked about. And because I carry my Catholicism with me, at various stages in my life it's disappeared completely and come back at other times like a wrecking ball. But I always used to approach some of these issues like abortion, like the death penalty, like many other issues. I used to approach them from the indoctrination I'd received as a child, the Catholic indoctrination that I'd received as a child. So I would often find myself cast in the role of critic of assisted dying. I've told you this before, but what I haven't told you before, Alan says it was actually Arthur from Derbyshire who did the pigeon impressions. And I don't even know for sure that you're joking, Alan. I noticed this morning that it had become a debating topic for me. So it started off as a debating topic when I would go on the telly and someone like Nicky Campbell would say to me, "James, you disagree?" And I'd go, "Yes, I think human life is sacred and it is not for any man or woman to say that we could take this life away, and the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm." And you know, you know how those shows work, and you know how I work. I'd be fairly persuasive, but not... Karen says, "Now you've said the death penalty debate has gone away, James, it's bound to come back." I should not have said that out loud, should I? It's like a Halloween film. And so it started off as a debate, and then I started meeting people, particularly people with conditions that they knew were going to be incrementally debilitating. This almost torturous, or possibly not even almost, this torturous notion of chronicling your own decline and knowing with absolute certainty what that decline was going to look like. That idea, and to my shame, I have forgotten the name of the woman who really brought this into focus for me. I've got two names in my head, but I can't get them mixed up with each other. And one of them was a massive campaigner in a slightly different field. And I was sitting in a green room. I think I've told you this bit before. I was sitting in a green room in the BBC somewhere, I think in Belfast, if you're interested. And I just heard this voice say, "Where's James O'Brien?" And I said, "Hello." And she came over to me in her motorised wheelchair and she said, I really need to talk to you because I've seen you on these programmes before and you're brilliant, but you're wrong. And I'm here to tell you why. And in that moment, it ceased to be a debating topic for me. It ceased to be a human issue. It was wrenched quite violently out of the realms of rhetoric oh, let's have a heated debate. And here's O'Brien with his size 10s to come wading in and tell everyone else why they're wrong. Oh, and look, he's appealing to God. And she just talked me through the reality of her own existence. She had multiple sclerosis, and she was dying slowly. She was diminishing slowly. I think she may even have used the word disappearing slowly. And it ceased to be a debating topic, right? That makes sense. And as the months and years passed, the story dropped a little bit off the radar, but it was not a debating topic for me. For me, I saw her. For me, it was her story. For me, it was the individual experience became the lens through which I was looking at this issue, rather than religion or the sanctity of human life, if you can separate that in any way from religion. It was her individual experience, or the individual experiences of people like her, that became the lens through which I looked at this issue. So it ceased to be a debating issue. And then we started doing it on the radio. Then my job changed, my career changed, and it became, what, would you say 10 years ago? 10 years ago, assisted dying started becoming, and I'd use the language advisedly, I'm not trivialising anything, it started becoming a bit of a hardy perennial of the radio phone-in roster. So you've heard all of us talk about assisted dying at various times on LBC, and you've heard all of us express our opinions. But I thought this morning, or I noted this morning, that perhaps because I'd heard so many stories now, for me it had almost swung back to being a debating topic. So if you tell me at 11 minutes after 11 the story of losing your mum in hideous and unbearable circumstances that could have been very compassionately curtailed by the bill that Kim Ledbetter is introducing and has provided much more detail of today, then by 11:13 I would be in favour of it. And then you told me at 11:13 that you had received a diagnosis yourself. You had been given a 6-month to live sentence, or whatever word that you prefer. And you're on the phone to tell me that was 3.5 years ago. And you're doing great. And you are still living under a death sentence, and you are still terminally ill. But the vagaries of human life, the vagaries of the human condition, and the vagaries of medicine, which is after all man-made and therefore subject to the vagaries of the human condition and the vagaries of human life, is such that 6-month prognosis was wrong. And then it became something new. It's neither an issue that I look at through the lens of other people's personal experiences, or it's a debating topic where you forget about the actual reality and humanity of the people involved. I should have said that sooner. It's almost as if the people involved, when you're seeing it as a debating topic, as a hardy perennial of the sixth form debating societies, the actual human beings involved are pieces on a chessboard. They're inanimate. You know they're the real, and you know they're there, but you're not thinking about the humanity of the situation. And then you meet someone like Debbie Purdy. Oh, thank you. Then you meet someone like Debbie Purdy, and it becomes entirely human. The story becomes a story of real human beings. But then you meet someone of the opposite opinion, who's possibly in the same condition. The best example is probably my friend Henry Fraser, who is a mouth painter of incredible ability, who broke his neck in a freak accident and has become an inspiration to so many people with his work and the way that he lives his life. But other men of the same age who've suffered similar freakish accidents, whether at the seaside or on a rugby pitch, have subsequently gone to Dignitas. So two completely different people enduring very, very similar tragedies and coming out with entirely polar opposite positions. Does one cancel out the other? Does the existence of one mean that we should not allow the other to make the decision that we all find slightly chilling? And what it became today was a really difficult moral question. So it's not a hardy perennial of the sixth form debating society anymore. And it's not a game of sort of personal experience tennis, where someone has a story that makes you go, of course we should have assisted dying. Then someone else tells you a story that makes you think, well, maybe we shouldn't. And on the other side, on that side, the maybe we shouldn't side, you get the theoreticals as well. The theoretical, given 6 months to live, still alive 4 years later. That happened to a friend of mine. And most of that 4 years was high quality existence that was even more precious than the life he'd lived before his diagnosis. You also have people might be coerced into it. People might not want to do it, but they will because they become a burden on their family. And that can apply to terminal illness. The other theoretical problem you have, it would be thin end of the wedge worries, which again, the human condition teaches us exist. People it may not be contained within the current legislation, but once the current legislation is in place, then the agitation, the advocacy, the campaigning moves into a new space. It campaigns for something more. So right now, terminally ill patients who have 2 doctors and 6 months to live can be allowed to kill themselves 3 weeks after getting the judgment. What is it? What do they campaign for next? 2 weeks? 1 week, 3 days, 1 doctor, no terminal illness diagnosis, quality of life assessment, free will. Do you see what I mean? So I don't know. I just don't know. There's something about the detail that has made it really real. There's something about the detail that Kim has provided. The requirement of 2 independent doctors to determine whether the person satisfies the criteria to take their life. A judge will then have to take evidence from at least one of the doctors and could question the terminally ill person themselves before deciding whether they should be allowed to self-administer the fatal medication. This process should take at least 3 weeks unless the person's death is more imminent than that, according to the bill. It stipulates that at least 7 days must elapse between the 2 doctors making their assessment and a further 14 days after the judge has made a ruling. And that terminally ill diagnosis as well becomes part of the pontification, part of the process. And there's something about seeing it in black and white with a side order of Wes Streeting. No one ever wants a side order of Wes Streeting, but there is a side order. I didn't mean that as a criticism of Wes Streeting. I just thought it was a strange phrase to pop out of my mouth. But Wes Streeting, as Secretary of State for Health, opposing this bill because he doesn't think the health service can deal with it. And maybe, I don't know whether there's any politicking involved there. Knowing Wes a bit, I don't think there is. And expected to die within 6 months, as we've established, is a very fluid prognosis, far from infallible. Katie says, straight off the mark, I don't see what you mean, as it is their choice and their life. Yeah, well, I've not expressed myself very well then, because there will be people who think they've got 6 months to live who've got 4. There'll be people, do you know, can I use a really crass analogy? Or would that be wrong? I used to, when I was younger, I used to be curious about people who choose to take their own lives by jumping off high buildings. I had a weird, slightly, what would the word be? Slightly macabre fascination with the idea of changing your mind on the way down and what those final seconds would be like if you kind of thought, oh, wow, I wish I hadn't done that after all. I don't know whether that's relevant or suitable even for inclusion in this conversation, but it's in my mind now, so I'm sharing it with you. So now we've seen the detail. Now we've seen it in black and white, this language, this clinical language, eligible, terminally ill, allowed to kill themselves, independent doctors, satisfies the criteria. Sounds like an insurance document, as I suppose it should and must. But is anyone else feeling surprised to balk slightly at something you thought you wanted now that you've seen what it's actually going to look like? And that's one of the oddest questions I've ever asked you. But I really want this conversation to be open to people who don't have personal experience and personal stories. You're welcome as well. Of course you are. Absolutely you are. You must join the conversation. But for those of us who are blessed with a degree of distance from this story, I am surprised to find my position wobbling now that I know what it actually looks like, now that I know the thing that I thought that I wanted, now that I know what it looks like, I'm not that sure I want it after all. How about you? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
21 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Terminally ill could end lives 21 days after starting assisted dying. I mean, there's a reason why the wisdom of Solomon is still a figure of speech 3,000 years after Solomon exercised his wisdom in those famous examples. What's the most famous one? It's the two women who claim the baby is theirs. They say the same baby. Two women who claim it's theirs. So Solomon says, chop it in half and give them half each. And the woman who goes, God, no, let the other woman have it. He says, you must be the real mum. It's not perfect, is it, that reasoning? But we still speak about the wisdom of Solomon, and you'd need it, I think. I wouldn't want to make this decision for an entire society, for an entire population. But MPs will, and they have the protection, if you like, or the camouflage of democracy. So no one person bears responsibility for this decision. It will be a democratic vote in the House of Commons. I don't know which way it'll go, actually. But now that you've seen it in front of you, now that you are looking at the reality of it, the black and white of it, I wonder whether you feel some of the concerns that I think I do, and I reserve the right not to feel them in 10 minutes' time, but right now I do. Corpsey puts it well, that there are lots of debates that are framed incorrectly, James. Assisted dying is one of those. It is not a moral question, but a utilitarian one. And I may get out of that. I like that, because being raised a Catholic and it being almost impossible to entirely shrug off the trappings of a religious education or a religious upbringing, where if you want to, means that sometimes you can't distinguish between the moral and the utilitarian. God knows, most of 19th century continental philosophy is about the difficulties of distinguishing between moral philosophy and a kind of godless philosophy. Just read your Immanuel Kant. But Corpsey goes on, this simple framing brings more unpleasant questions. Why do we, as a society, dismiss disabled or seriously ill people? What impacts do our actions have upon those towards the end of their life? So if you're choosing to end your life, how big a role has the attitude that society has to seriously ill people played in your decision-making process? So if you were to get utilitarian about it, shouldn't we be improving the way that society treats you when you're terminally ill, rather than giving you the opportunity to end your life? Which I think just knocks at the door of Wes Streeting's reasoning when he says the NHS is not in a fit place at the moment to deliver this in a way that he would be comfortable with. It's 11:24. Ian is in Corwin in Wales. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Good
mate.
morning.
Hello.
Hi. It's just I was diagnosed 2 years ago with 12 months to live through prostate cancer. No symptoms, by the way, so guys, get yourselves checked.
Yeah, there you go.
And from that point, I was thinking to myself, I don't want to be here. I've only got 12 months. I'm going to be in a lot of pain and I'm going to die, and as you do. I went through my treatment, chemo, radiation. I had to retire because of that. And I took up, the one thing I love is music. So I took up managing and promoting bands, and now I'm just living the best life ever. I do tours with bands throughout the world. I've just been given another 12 months to live, and I'm loving it. But as soon as my health deteriorates, and I know I'm going down that road, like I watched both my in-laws and my parents recently go through this method where you just lay in a bed and slowly, put a patch on your arm and pat away. I think
You fade away. You fade away,
yes. So I know I'd rather go and take a tablet myself and do it if I can do that. Because, I think a lot of people are conscious of what they want and what they need. And I don't think it's really up to other people to decide, if they should or shouldn't. And if they want to, I'm all for it.
Did you get any pause at all when you were waiting to come on? And I made that point, or Corpsey made that point about society, the way, I mean, you know, if you were being really well looked after, better looked after than you would be now, and this is in no way a criticism of people who provide palliative care, but if we had, you know, a society that treated terminally ill people or severely disabled people better than it does, then the debate would be different, or even your position would be different.
Yeah, I'm sure that if we were given that opportunity, and new care was better. But I'm obviously just going through personal experience.
Yeah, well, exactly
my
that.
Parents and my father-in-law and mother-in-law, and it was horrific, and there wasn't no support. It was a terrible time for all four of them when they died, and I think if we did have that provision where I could be with my family and they could be with me when it comes, because it's going to come next year, if you know what I mean. It's coming.
Gosh,
but
yes.
I just don't want a situation where I'm in a lot of pain and being a burden on people.
And that's
saying if people panic about that.
That's that word frightens me, Ian. Burden.
Yeah.
The people that love you. Did you feel that your parents were a burden on you when you were looking after them?
No, not at all.
Who knows? Maybe if you'd been doing it for 30 years, it would have been merciful towards the end. But most people, particularly with a terminal illness that moves as quickly as yours, the people that love you are not going to necessarily want you to shuffle off this mortal coil earlier than scheduled, are they?
I know. And that's another point as well, because you distance yourself from people. I distance myself from my children because I don't want them when I do go.
Can I say that I think that's a mistake, or would that be very insensitive of me?
I know it's a mistake.
Okay.
And my wife goes mad at me for it, but I
can't do anything right. You can't even die right, can you, Ian? Honestly.
Not right.
I'm so glad you laughed at that, mate. Because if you hadn't laughed at that, you'd have left me in a very uncomfortable space.
Oh, you have a great day, James.
You too, and think about the kids a bit, Because they're going to miss you so much, regardless of how it happens. And the more memories, the more memories they've got, the easier it might be. You know.
I know.
All right.
I'm going to have to sort that out.
I think you are. I'm with your wife. I'm with your wife on that one. God bless you. Take care. Could you imagine if he hadn't laughed at that? That would. Yeah. Anyway, these are the tight ropes that we walk every day together on LBC. And Matt again makes a brilliant point. Oh, sorry, we haven't funded palliative care properly, so you can't have rights over your own death. And you put it like that. Having rights over your own death, it sounds final. And then I read about what has happened. I haven't got the information in front of me to be certain that this is all accurate, so I won't read it out. But you read about that slippery slope theory actually happening in some other countries and some other territories. And that perhaps becomes the biggest obstacle to full support for this, the idea that, okay, so we agree to that today. When's the last time that a moral movement stopped and didn't then seek to move the goalposts further, to move them a little bit more? I don't know. It's 11:30.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:33. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Listen, there's no right or wrong on something like this, is there? And I think that the people, and I've got a horrible feeling I used to be one, and it would be largely a religious thing. You insist from a position of biblical authority that this legislation would be awful and wrong, and you begin sounding like the late Ian Paisley. But it is a social issue. It's a thing for the whole of society. It's a question that it speaks to who we are, whether you have assisted dying legislation or not. So to see it written down, to see it in detail, you just find yourself wondering whether it is actually something that we should want. I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. I'll shut up now. Alex is in Edinburgh. Alex, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I was just phoning in as someone who's unfortunately had flirtations with suicidality and things, that You know, there are moments and times where things get weak and people struggle.
Yes.
And I think maybe in some of your conversations about, you know, when someone says that they want to die, they maybe should, like, I can understand there why there's so much, like, hesitation. But I would say that I think the guardrails and the support that's in place is really important, because what it's doing is it's putting the individual who's in question at the heart of it, while giving, like, medical evidence and backup. And it's not that it's going to happen immediately.
Do we know why this is? I mean, I can understand logistics, but it is an option, for want of a slightly less anodyne word. It's an option that's open to everybody else, whether they're terminally ill or not, isn't it? In the context of,
I don't know if I
suicide.
agree with that, because...
No, I mean technically. I'm being
right,
brutal
yeah,
about
yeah.
it. I mean technically, if I wanted to take my own life now, I could.
Yeah.
But
you could.
this offers an opportunity to people who couldn't do it logistically, or who want to do it in a more, what are we talking about, formal setting? Formalised?
Formal and legal, and give people a chance to say goodbye.
Yeah,
and
rather
give
than
people the
leaving,
opportunity
of course,
to give
that's
a
the art.
second.
Rather than leaving somebody to find you or to do all of that. Yeah, okay, yeah.
It's awful to find out, like,
exactly.
off the cuff that this had happened, and if you can't talk about it, it's not legal. If people start worrying about it because you can't have that conversation, then I can only imagine how much worse it is to receive that call saying that it's happened because they didn't have another choice.
So, I mean, in a way, your perspective could be the opposite. It could be precisely because, to use your own language, you've flirted with these thoughts and come away from them, that the idea of making it easier to do in the moment of flirtation would be a mistake, because you can come back from those places. Yeah, from those spaces.
Exactly. And if people know that you're in that position, you're more likely to get help that'll take you away from that.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
And
well, you say that, and this is, I mean, I'm normally a bit allergic to slippery slope arguments and thin end of the wedge arguments, but they wouldn't be cliches if they didn't have some truth, would they? So it might start off now, but what about the children who don't particularly want their parents to hang around for much longer because they can't wait to get their hands on the cash? Who's going to counsel them? Who's going to counsel those parents?
I guess it's the parents. Like, the doctors will make that decision on what the quality of life is. Like, it's not the child that's making the decision. And I think it kind of comes back to your conversation from the previous hour about what's more comfortable for the people that are left behind after the thing has happened.
Yes.
You know, like, are we trying to, like, justify a moral thing for ourselves because it makes us feel icky at the expense of the people who are really suffering?
It's not about us wanting it, it's about the individual, says Matt, which is the only point now where I disagree. It's about more than the individual. It's about what a society sanctions and facilitates, an entire society.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the thing, though, is that while the rules and legislations can be in place, it's still the decision of the individual.
Well, I guess that's what it comes down to, and that's part of what worries me. You used the word weakness advisedly. I know you did. There's a couple of people who don't think it has any place in this conversation, but it's all about context, and I'm sure, Rob, you appreciate that what Alex meant when he used that word. But if you were to contemplate it in the context of what you want in that moment, and the ease with which society allows you to act upon it, I think we're getting close to where some of the, and I'm not the only one, some of the responses today are coming from. That idea that you thought you wanted this, you probably still do, but something about seeing the detail of the legislation in black and white has given you the jitters, has given you the wobbles. And it's about the ease. It's about that taking away the space, perhaps, for the things that you describe. If you can guarantee that the counselling is there, the support is there, the room to change your mind, the encouragement even to change your mind is there, then I don't know. We'll see. Thank you, Alex. Emma is in Ipswich. Emma, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, James.
Hello, Emma.
Thank you. Can I really thank you for the way you're coming at this?
You certainly can, Emma. Yes.
So really, really thank you, because it's something incredibly close to my heart. So I, in 2021, I was diagnosed straight stage 4 breast cancer with it in my bones. And and I was given, thank you, I was given 6 to 9 months to live without treatment. It went through that. However, I am now approaching 4 years stable. 4 years stable on my first line treatment, and I am in great shape for somebody in my situation.
Yes.
I'm a bit creaky, but
Sure.
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right.
Brilliant.
This is really difficult for me. Sorry, my voice is a little bit because this assisted dying has been everywhere.
Yeah.
And I just feel like, I don't know, I'm either listening to stories about people dying horrendously and screaming and being awful, or people should, when I'm thinking, I just think you're talking about me.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
It is. Yes.
I said to your gorgeous producer, I'm please don't hold it against me. I'm a dodgy Arsenal fan with 3 dogs, a niece and a nephew who absolutely love me, and I care for my mum. I love sunsets, I love sunrises, I love autumn, I love spring. And since my diagnosis, do you know what? I have given myself the right to live my life my way. And it's, so every year when I get my PIP, I have to go through a questionnaire, and I have to admit that I could be gone in 12 months.
Right.
My team hope I'm going to keep going for a lot longer, but there is the possibility I could be gone in 12 months.
Yes.
Now, I think at one point there was a conversation that they wanted this cut-off at 12 months, and now it's gone to 6. Now, that's really... That's...
Tell me.
It's terrifying. It makes me feel disposable, actually.
Oh, gosh.
Sorry. Breathe.
Hey, all the time, Emma.
Thank you.
All the time, all the space.
It makes me feel disposable in a situation where I didn't ask for this. But you know what? I'm living, and it's great. It's hard. I said that over the summer I had a really hard month.
Yeah.
It's quite dark. 'Cause it is hard. It's in my spine, it's in my sternum, it's in my pelvis, and it's in my ribs. So it hurts.
Yes.
It hurts. And so as well, when I hear people saying that their parents or whoever dies screaming in pain, I'm like, stop! Can you just think that there are real human beings in this that are trying to find their own way through? And I did say I spend most of my time playing grocery roulette.
What's that?
I'm happy I can
roulette?
Okay, so I'm happy I can outlive a cucumber.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm going up against a tin of corned beef.
If you carry on like this, Emma, you realise you could be Prime Minister.
I know. Got it all going on.
You could beat a lettuce. You could be the second longest.
Hey, easy.
So what could how would the conversation is going to be conducted? You're comfortable with it, or you were comfortable with it until somehow 12 months and 6 months changed everything, changed the way it feels to you, I think.
It did to a point. And you know what? Prior to my diagnosis, I was like, yeah, everybody should have the right to do it. Oh, get a plane to Dignitas. Everybody should be doing it. Yeah. Now, I'm like, whoa, let's just... And, and God love Esther Ransom, but she's got a very loud voice and a very prominent voice, and I just feel we've got some big voices screaming, and there's all of us living it every single day, just going, hi, we're over here living our lives, can we just have a thought? And one thing with the West Streeting... Yes. Go on. I do feel there needs to be more put into palliative. There does. It's a real postcode.
Because if you're taking the decision based on inadequacy of care, then that's not fair at all. No. Because there's so much more to this than some of the conversations allow. This will make you smile, right? So two texts coming in while you're talking, both responding to one of the words that you used. Robbie goes for, we are disposable. We will all die one day anyway. And then I've got to find the other one now from David, who says, you are not disposable. You are a brave, courageous woman. I am so pleased you are fighting so well. Keep it up. Kiss, kiss, kiss. From David in Farnham.
I love him.
I thought you might prefer him. But that is two people listening to the same conversation.
But do you know what? If I had a fiver for everybody who said to me, "Oh, we're all dying. I could get hit by a bus tomorrow." Do you know what? We are sitting blindfolded downhill in the bus lane, and the brakes are off the buses.
Yes.
So don't give it that. And also, do you know what? When you get a diagnosis, it doesn't half sharpen how you think.
Well, I can tell that. Well, I didn't. I mean, I don't know how sharply you thought beforehand, but you've certainly, there's no flies on you latterly in that context. And what you remind us all of is that even in your position, it's not straightforward.
No.
And you're not just speaking for you either. I know you are just speaking for you. You say this conversation is about me, but it's all the other yous as well. And it's all the other minds that change and all the other humans that wobble.
So many. The mums I see hanging on for the kids to hang on for this. My dear friend Trey, who I've just lost, who fought through hell this year. It's just not simple. And you know what? I want a good death. If I'm going to have a good life, I want a good death. And I don't want to be scared into it.
No. I'm going to read you some of the messages that have come in just for my enjoyment as much as yours. This lady is just lovely. To think that she's ever felt disposable is just horrible. Emma, let me. God, they're coming in too fast now. Please send my love to this lovely lady who is speaking now. Can you tell this lady who is an Arsenal fan that I have 2 season tickets and will take her for free anytime? That's from Larry. I can't get involved in that sort of thing.
You can't.
Big fan of Emma, my Ipswich sister. Bless her. We should all live our lives how we want to because life's too short. And on it goes. I promise you. That's all for you. All right.
Thank you. Thank you.
And no, thank you for helping us to see this a little bit more clearly than we could before.
Thanks, my love.
Stay safe.
Take care.
All right, you
too.
Take
care, my darling.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. She set me off now. 11:46 is the time. Staying with us till 12. A couple of phone lines free now. And does anyone want to have a crack at the societal question? Because I dance around it. I think I've got too much baggage. I'm also, I don't want to say this as if I'm boasting, but also, you speak to someone like Emma, or you listen to someone like Emma, even if you don't have the privilege of speaking to her. You are speaking to her through me. And it would change your mind, right? Somebody as powerful and as emotionally literate as that can talk to you, and you go, oh, well, actually, on the other hand. But can anyone step above it all and talk about what the societal question is here, what the tension between the moral and the utilitarian really is? Articulate these weird feelings some of us have about misgivings is a good word. Some weird misgivings, despite. Do you think you can do that? Because I do think you're right. A couple of you, one of you, in a not a very pleasant way actually, but today's not the day for that sort of behaviour, suggesting that you can't abandon your religious upbringing. It's very, very hard to abandon a religious indoctrination. I abandoned it pretty quickly when it came to a woman's bodily autonomy. All the stuff that I was indoctrinated with regard to abortion disappeared pretty quickly in my teenage years. But maybe some of this is still there. Maybe there's some vestigial sense that God gave you life and only God can take it away. I don't know, but I haven't got there quite. Why would it be? Here's a question: if you can answer this, and you're perfectly entitled to answer it by saying it wouldn't, but I think right now I'm more interested in how you answer this question. Why would it be bad for a society to have this legislation? Not for you or your mum, or it wouldn't be bad because of me and because of my gran. Why would it be bad for people you've never met before? Why would it be bad for society as a whole? Don't give me the old Margaret Thatcher line, all right? She didn't quite say that there was no such thing as a society, but there is. Spoiler alert. There is such a thing as society. Civilization. Community. Why would it be bad for those things to have this legislation? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:51. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The conversation is, as ever, a little bit more nuanced, or a lot more nuanced than some of the coverage allows. And I'm a big fan of Kim Ledbetter. She's been on Full Disclosure. The sister, if you didn't know, of the late Joe Cox, And she has approached this with enormous responsibility and rigour, but seeing it written down. But even before I spoke to Emma, who responds viscerally and very, very personally to the 12-month, 6-month tension, many campaigners wanting it to be extended to those liable to die within 12 months as opposed to those within 6 months. And it just, you see what you mean, you see what she means about feeling a little bit squeezed out by these kind of conversations, even though they're about her. Sarah is in Wimborne. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Hi. It's a difficult question.
You can say that again, Sarah.
yeah. I mean, I've got health problems myself, but, I'm all right at the moment. I've had a bit of cancer, but that 12 years in remission or similar. For me, I think we do, at the moment, we do keep people alive. And I think sometimes wrongly, not wrongly, but it can be very difficult for people being kept on drugs. If you haven't got the capacity, people are kept alive sometimes, and it must be awful for them. You know what I mean? We've got the pharmaceutical industry. Already people keep their lives going longer, don't we? That naturally would have died. We would have naturally died before.
Well, but you could say that about tooth extractions, or penicillin. There's lots of things that we would have died of once that we don't die of now. But I understand the point you're making. You're talking about people who aren't going to get up again, as it were, being kept alive, I think.
Without the quality of life as well. And that's what really hurts me, having been a nurse. The quality of life, or for my mum during COVID, it just breaks my heart, that does.
But does this apply to them, do you think? Is this, because they wouldn't necessarily be in the category of being expected to die within 6 months. You're almost reminding us of the existence of people who might be in a form of indefinite limbo, but not free to make this decision, not able to make this decision.
Well, yeah, that's right, because at the moment, the only thing you can say you don't want is the research. You can't say that if you've had a bad stroke, that you don't want the ambulance called. You can't say that. There's lots of things where, there's no choice. And then you could be left really quite not unwell with hardly any quality of life. And it's so difficult, isn't it? Because the devil is going to be in the detail, and we haven't got a good.
That's the problem. So the broader the question, the easier it is to not go along with it. That sounds wrong. The easier it is to welcome. The broader the question, should people have the right to end their lives if their lives have become unbearable, or if their lives are going to end soon anyway and they're in terrible pain? The broader the question, the easier it is to welcome. The more detail you provide. So when humans are charged with the job of deciding the circumstances in which this can happen, it gets a little hairier, because of some of the things you've said. You're offering up as people who should have the ability to make the same decision but currently can't. But these points could work the other way. You could, well, hang on a minute, why are you letting these people do it and not these? But as soon as you let these people do it, then these people will want to do it, and those people will want to do it, and you end up in the sort of slippery slope side of the conversation. Sarah, thank you. And always interesting to hear from nurses and doctors in particular. Palliative care people, I think some polling showed, are more against it than the rest of the population, disproportionately opposed to this, as perhaps you would expect. Rochelle is in Crowthorne in Berkshire. Rochelle, what made you pick up the phone?
Okay, I'm going to have to apologise. I'm nervous as hell, so if I make a total fool of myself, I'm sorry. But anyway, so I think what I wanted to say was, so I'm coming at this from the perspective that I watched my mum die from ovarian cancer, and she did have, I would think, probably quite high-quality palliative care in a hospice.
Yes.
So I also have the same gene, so I'm the same age as you, and I haven't had a diagnosis yet, but I'm fully expecting to get a diagnosis fairly, in the next few years. So I watched my mum die, and to me, it didn't look pretty. So she was in a hospice, and she kept saying, "I just want to die." And that kind of really resonated, it kind of really stayed with me. And it didn't really look like the kind of thing I would want to go through. So I think what I'm getting upset about is other people making that decision for me. If they want to make a decision and say, look, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't want to die, I think that's fine. But I don't really understand why someone would be making that decision for me.
Yeah, and that I think that's why you were worried at the beginning, because it does seem incredibly simple and straightforward to you, and yet we've spent 56 minutes talking about wrinkles and complications. I think that's what I mean about the more you zone in on, the more you laser it down, the easier it becomes. But the more you step back and the more you look at the massive picture, if you like, or the big picture, then you do worry about people who aren't your mum. People who don't have loving daughters, people who might be coerced into saying that they want to end their lives, people who might be persuaded to say that they want to end their lives, when if they were in a room with different people, they might not want to. They're going to make it illegal for anyone who, by dishonesty, coercion or pressure, induces another person either to make a declaration. But how the hell would you prove it? So that's where the problems come in, when you step away from your mum's bedside, at which point this is a really straightforward, this is a no-brainer, isn't it, when you're standing there? But when you step back and look at the other things that could be ushered in by doing what would be right for your mum, that's where the debate is.
I think the other thing is that people do still have the option to do it. It's just like, so they could end up going to Switzerland or whatever. That is an option.
For some, but not for all, of course.
But then they would just... But someone like me who may well take that one up, if need be, I would just have to do it a lot sooner. So that would mean that my husband would get less time with me, if that's something that would concern him.
Well, let's both hope that it is, Rochelle. Let's presume that. But it's the quality of the time as well, from your point of view, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well, that's the only thing that it's not the length of time, because if I'm still sort of going, but just sort of, bedbound or highly dependent, or just kind of just really feeling quite rubbish, that's not really something that would interest me personally. I appreciate everyone's different, and I'd be quite happy if everyone had a choice.
So it is. You've nailed it, actually. I mean, it's about how much, and you at the moment have full confidence that because you can make this decision, compos mentis, in full possession of the facts and clear-eyed, then everybody could, and that's why anyone can say this is not about society, this is not about other people, this is all about what each individual wants. Thank you, Rochelle. I do remember important points. I don't know what you were worried about. You made your case brilliantly, and I don't know that I'm any clearer than I was at the beginning of this, except that the only thing I'm certain of is that I wouldn't want to be responsible for making this decision myself, and I wouldn't want to be responsible for telling people that they can't do it. Because that just seems really cruel, and I don't know if arrogant's quite the right word that I want, but it probably is, isn't it? It's 12 noon.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12. What do we think about me inserting some... I don't think it would work. Well, it wouldn't have worked today because the subjects are so serious. But I don't know why I've developed this late-in-life enthusiasm for missing word games. I read you a headline with a word missing and you try and guess what the word is. It's tickling me pink. I can't read out most of the messages because my inbox is quite analogue. Well, it's not analogue, obviously, it's digital, but it goes so quickly. I think we did find a way to pause it, didn't we? Yeah, that big 11. Is it the big pause button, Keith? That's how you pause it? Yeah, we did find a way to pause it, but so I might actually try and do that today. But your answers come in so quickly, so thick and fast, that I can't keep up. So I shall try a little harder today because I really like them. I'm really enjoying them. The question I was going to ask you is whether it would be appropriate to insert them into the kind of conversations that we've been having on the show so far. My instinct is it wouldn't, actually, even with my extraordinary deft touch. I don't think that sometimes it would be appropriate. But anyway, I'll just leave you with that because I want you to feel part of the programme making process, not just a consumer, but also a contributor. I've got two for you today, one of which you've almost certainly seen already, one of which I don't think works as a missing word round, at least the headline I've got doesn't. But did you know the police were called to a 5-hour queue for Le Creuset cookware? So people were so keen to get their hands on some reduced price Le Creuset cookware. Le Creuset are like the casserole pots, which are all the pretty colours. Do you know the ones I mean? They're really heavy. You wouldn't want to drop a Le Creuset pot on your foot. But this is an extraordinary story about the pans, which still cost hundreds of pounds, even if you get them at a discount. But they had a warehouse sale in Hampshire, and the traffic was so awful. It was like Jeremy Clarkson had opened a new farm or a new farm shop. The traffic was snaking halfway around the county down in Hampshire, and it was so bad that the police had to be called to deal with it. The largest ever in-person event that they have ever done. Anyway, that's not the game. Here it is. Can I do an accent on this, do you think, or would that be inappropriate? Where have they gone? France grieves loss of blank. I think I can do can I do a French accent? Is that where have they gone? Where have they gone? France grieves loss of blank. What do you think the missing word or words are in this? Where have they gone? Where have they gone? France grieves loss of blank. Have a guess at that one. I'm going to pause it. Sorry, everyone's cross that they've missed the Le Creuset sale now. Anthony, you've got to pay attention. Also, you'd have had to get yourself down to Hampshire, which I presume is easier said than done. You can probably tell by my tone that we are moving on from some of the hefty conversations that we've had in the previous parts of the programme to address now still familiar but slightly lighter territory. I never quite got my head around the invitation to hate everybody who was working from home during lockdown. Do you remember? Or people who carried on working from home after lockdown. I remember a couple of early calls we took. They're good, you know, these phone-in shows, because they sometimes give you an opportunity to see things from an angle you wouldn't otherwise be able to discern. One of the first ones we took was a bloke who was the office manager. I shouldn't laugh. The office manager of an office which had 200 staff in it, and within about 2 months of them all being sent home to work from home and everyone being set up on remote working, he got the call that he wasn't an office manager anymore because they were going to be moving out of the office permanently. Do you remember that? That was quite early on during lockdown. He was quite sanguine about it, but his employers had calculated, A, that productivity was entirely unaffected by the movement of a lot of the workforce to home, and B, therefore they wouldn't need an office anymore. So they were not going to be paying rent on the floor of the office building that they had 200 staff working on. And our friend was sadly, well, the good news was he'd be able to listen to the programme a lot more than he could do previously. But the bad news was he didn't have a job. So that was one of the early calls that we took on this issue. But I also remember everyone lining up to get cross about it, even though, again, early callers were telling us that productivity was actually going up. Bosses and employers and managers were telling us that productivity was actually going up. People who can't wait to put the boot in to teachers and train drivers when they're where they have the appalling audacity to ask for a pay rise that, for example, keeps them in line with the increases in cost of living, were suddenly becoming great champions of teachers and train drivers because they wouldn't be able to avail themselves of the opportunity to work from home. I mean, the hypocrisy was extraordinary. It was almost like the people who don't believe anyone's poor, but think that if you are struggling to pay your school fees after they introduce VAT, you're practically a Dickensian urchin who's in desperate need of help and support from the rest of the population. Some of these hypocrisies, I'm not going to lie to you, they tickle me pink. Now, people who don't think there's such a thing as food poverty, but are absolutely adamant that if they put VAT on private school fees, then it's time to get the violins out. No such thing. There's no one needs you to feel sorry for them because they can't afford stuff, unless it's private school fees. Exactly the same people. Absolutely nothing nice to say about teachers or train drivers until teachers or train drivers become people who can't work from home. And because this week you hate people working from home even more than you hate teachers and train drivers with the audacity to ask for a pay rise, you're going to start championing the cause of teachers and train drivers because they become a weapon with which you can hit people working from home over the head. I wonder what the cross-section is for people who use poppies as weapons, even on Armistice Day. And people who would use teachers and train... Oh, no, my throat's gone. I could tell that was going to happen because my voice went up an octave. There's a little lesson for us all there. If my voice goes up an octave, stop. Because if it goes up an octave, that little tickle in the winter months, October, November onwards, anyway. The other call we took that kind of blew open the whole conversation. So we've got our office manager. All right, it's a lesson for me alone. I probably shouldn't have included you in that little moment. That you've got the office manager there. That's moment one. Moment two, we should really have seen coming. And it was about commerce, not just about people who have investment in real estate, commercial real estate, people who rent out office blocks. So our friend who's lost his job because his boss has suddenly realised he doesn't need an office anymore, it's bad news for him. Who's it worse news for? Who was making more money out of that office with 200 people in it than the office manager of the office with 200 people in it? Yes, altogether now, the landlord, James. And landlords, the bigger the landlord, the more likely they are to have fingers in lots of pies, up to and including newspapers. Oh, and when can't you buy a newspaper? Answer, when you're working from home and no longer commuting. So the newspapers went tonto. They went fast and they went early on attacking people for working from home. And when was the last time the newspapers cared about whether the people they were attacking deserved to be attacked, or whether the people they were encouraging to hate the people that they were attacking actually should hate the people? No, never, for example. Never, ever. So that's how it happened. The reality explained to us by the office manager, and then the hysterical, rhetorical response from much of the usually right-wing media, because it meant that they were seeing their wealth being threatened. And what does right-wing media do, boys and girls? It protects wealth, James, to the exclusion of all other considerations. Why are we talking about this today? Well, something quite interesting has happened. And I'm not suggesting for a minute that it offers some succour to the people who suddenly discovered supportive feelings towards teachers and train drivers, having spent their entire lives denigrating them for having the audacity to ask for pay rises to keep them in pace with the living wage. But they kind of had a point. I need your help with this one. It's quite clever. Not the story itself, that's pretty straightforward and largely statistical, but the angle I want to take on it is a little bit too clever for me to do alone. 28% of employees call hybrid working the new normal. Okay? Don't like the phrase the new normal, but I should probably stop saying that because it has become part of the new normal. The new normal is the new normal. 28%. So a little bit of office, a little bit from home. They split their week. 5 years, by the way, since the start of the pandemic. Who could have guessed? Who'd have got that right straight out of the blocks? How many years do you think it is since the start of the pandemic? Well, you'd just think of the month, wouldn't you? And it was just towards the end of that. Yeah. All right. Scratch that. The difference between degree-level educated people and everyone else is absolutely stunning. I mean, truly stunning. Workers with degree-level education are how many times more likely to have a hybrid working arrangement than those with no qualifications? Have a guess. Actually, let me unpause my... Actually, first of all, what do you think the French have lost? Karen suggests that loving feeling. There are a few others coming in, but again, I haven't quite got the hang of controlling my inbox in this way yet. No, they haven't lost the Mona Lisa. A few of you have seen the story. You're cheating if you've seen the story. It's not pudding. It's not style. Thank you for all your compliments about my brilliant French accent. I'm far too modest to read them all out, and I definitely don't sound like an extra from Hello, Hello, Dave. It's not frogs, John, but well played. Nice open goal. The answer is not the monarchy. That would have been quite a long time ago. And no, it's not snails. I can see why you went for snails. Where have they gone? France grieves loss of blank. So I'll give you the correct answer to that shortly. The other question I asked you was workers with a degree level education are 10 times more likely to have a hybrid working. 10 times. You've got a degree, you're 10 times more likely to be working from home or from home and the office. And that did actually give me pause, because guess what else happens? You're happier. The people who are doing hybrid working report improvements in their mental health. They report that they're getting 24 minutes more sleep. They're spending more time on exercise. They're saving an average of 56 minutes from commuting. So that is time that now belongs to them. The government recognises that this is the new normal. They are introducing changes to workers' rights that will enhance flexibility. Some employers, meanwhile, are pushing staff to get back to their desks. And that would be staff who are 10 times more likely to be degree educated. Companies like Amazon, Goldman Sachs, Boots, Barclays, Asda. If it's a company, I wonder whether there's something in the idea of a company where you have people who could never possibly work from home and you have people who could. And just out of a sense of natural justice, they're telling the people who could work from home that they can't anymore. So a supermarket becomes possibly the most obvious example. But this is really mad in a way, because there's no actual rationale for it. You are telling the people who can work from home that you are deliberately and for no real reason making their life worse by making them come back to the office. And the reason that you're doing it is that there are some people downstairs on the shop floor, figure of speech. I appreciate Asda's office is not actually above an Asda. But I'll get a message now telling me, actually, James, I think you'll find that there is an Asda office above my local Asda in Doncaster. But that's not natural. Do you see what I mean? It's a bit like when private sector pensions got pinched or punched or eradicated. And I always used to reel at people saying, well, I haven't got a pension, so why should the public say mine's been... It'd be like saying I got mugged on Friday and I won't be happy until everyone's been mugged. I got robbed at the weekend. So is there any envy? Is it going to boost the morale of the people on the shop floor to see all the office workers being forced to come back to work? I don't know if this question is big enough to generate a whole hour, but we've done a lot on working from home. We've taken the mickey out of the people who were against it without really knowing why, or were against it without being prepared to tell you that it was because they were just, as usual, shilling for wealth or doing the bidding of the landlords. But what does it do to a split workforce? All right, so the numbers are in, the results are in. If you hybrid work, you do some or all of your work from home, your life has improved measurably. Your life has got considerably better. You've got about an hour a day. You've got more sleep. You're doing more exercise. You're probably eating a bit better. So the results are in. And it's better. Your life is better. But in the same breath, we have that list of companies that is now pushing staff to get back to their desks. So it is ordering staff to diminish their quality of life. You see why I find this fascinating, right? Your boss is telling you, yes, we know your life is better and you're doing your job quite brilliantly. We're not expecting you to do your job any better. We're just going to make your life worse by ordering you to come back to the office. So, question number one, why are they doing it? 0345 6060 973. Why are they doing it? Okay, possible answer, because the morale of the people who can't work from home is hit by the fact that their colleagues in the offices upstairs have got better lives or things are improving. But I don't think that works. I mean, how much crossover is there? That's why Asda, Drew, Goldman Sachs is all office workers. There'll be a few people that probably have to be in the bit. So why are they doing it? Why are bosses determined to spoil the lives of their workers by ordering them back to the office? But the question I'd really like, the one I don't think we'll get an hour out of, but I hope we do. I hope there are enough people listening from both sides. We used to say blue collar and white collar. Blue collar if you're working with your hands, white collar if you're working with a computer in the 21st century, or you're doing office work. Has it introduced tension to your workplace? Has it introduced tension? 0345 6060 973. James, I'm a builder, says John, and I'd love to see everybody go back to the office so I don't have to be quiet every time they have a meeting when they're working from home. I bet builders' lives have been ruined, haven't they? You're building an extension and we're upstairs trying to present radio shows or trying to do the... I don't know. So how I'll tell you what, it's 12:20. I'm in one of those moods, you can probably tell. If you don't press a button soon, Keith, I'm not going to stop talking. How has it changed your life? Okay? How has it improved your life? Is it introducing tension in the workplace? And how do you feel about being told, Or rather, why are bosses telling people to diminish their quality of life? So there's 3 questions for you there. How has it changed your life, for better or for worse? 0345 6060 973. Has it? Because there is inequality here. So is it creating tensions at work between the people who have to be there and the people who don't? 0345 6060 973. And why are bosses doing it? If we know now, we have measured the fact that it improves your life, why are bosses telling you to press reverse and go back to how things were before, even though those things were worse?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'll give you the answer to that one quite early today, because no one's going to get it right in a million years. And you can see why. Where have they gone? Where have they gone? France grieves loss of what? The answer is Cadbury fingers. Would you believe? There's a huge shortage of Les Fingers de Cadbury. That's actually not made up. That sounds like Del Boy, doesn't it? What's the French for chocolate fingers, Del? Les Fingers de Cadbury, Rodney. No, it is actually what they call them in France. Crème de menthe. And they've disappeared. There's a huge shortage of. They're changing hands for hundreds of euros now. So keen are people to get their hands on chocolate fingers. May 2024, apparently. Cadbury fingers were taken from us, says the petition. There's always a petition. These delicious chocolate-covered biscuits were more than snacks to us. They were a tradition and a symbol of shared moments and pleasure. We value these little treats. We want our Cadbury fingers back. Please sign the petition. 23 after 2. I should take a call, shouldn't I? Really? No one's enjoying this. Stephen's in Walthamstow. Stephen, what do you want to say?
Hi, James. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Steve. Would you like a Cadbury's chocolate finger?
I'd love one, thanks.
There you go, mate. Fill your boots. The French haven't got any. Ha ha ha. So it tastes even sweeter. Carry on. Go on. What made you pick up the phone?
I'm a first-time caller, so I'm a little bit nervous. But
just giving you a biscuit. How can you still be nervous? This is ridiculous. Carry on. What a welcoming host I am. Go on. So working from home.
Yeah. So basically, I now work from home. I was out from 8 a.m. until about 10 p.m.
Whoa!
Every day, 5 days a week, and then I was out in the mornings on Saturdays. And what I do is basically I'm a personal tutor,
right?
And so I used to spend all day, literally going from place to place around London.
Unpaid when you're travelling between clients, like care workers.
No, I wasn't paid, obviously. I'm only paid for the time that I'm
That's
there.
what I'm saying. Unpaid between clients, just like care workers are. Often home visitors.
Yeah. And then lockdown happened. When lockdown happened, my daughter was 7 months old, and we were really worrying about how we're ever going to be able to spend any time with her. But my wife's freelance, and she didn't get any kind of she didn't get any maternity or anything like that, so I had to do it. Anyway, lockdown happened, and my life literally just changed overnight, because it meant that I didn't have to spend that time commuting anymore between each client. It meant I could basically double the amount of hours where I was earning money. It meant that we were able to get a little bit of a deposit together. So now we're on shared ownership, but we've got a flat. So I'm not paying 100% rent anymore.
So it's completely changed your life.
100%. And now I've even started up my own company because I've been able to have that little bit of extra time. Okay. So I'm actually doing, it's moved from one thing to another.
And I mean, you do all your teaching on Zoom, online?
Yes, I do.
And you haven't noticed any problems with that? Like lower levels of application or less connection, less chemistry with your pupils, with your students?
Actually, with what I do, there's two reasons why, but what I do, it's actually got better. And if you want me to, I can tell you the reasons why, if that helps. But,
yeah, it would do. I'd be interested.
So number one, the main subject that I teach is maths. And with Zoom, you have whiteboards and you have share screen. It means that I'm able to interact with the client like one-on-one, and then we can both annotate the screen, which basically means that their focus is more there.
Wow.
So that's one thing. And the other thing, I've forgotten, the relationship. So a big part of my kind of USP and what I do is I specifically work with teenagers who've had to be removed from school for a range of reasons, but people who need a bit of an arm around the shoulder. And that's become a part of it as well, about the way, because so what I'll do is sometimes we'll put towards the end, we'll put like a game of chess in, or we'll play a game, and then they're able to offload stuff to me, and it's created a world where we're able to actually get better productivity and better relationship with them as well.
No downside then?
I mean, the downside is that I spend a lot of time in front of a screen and my eyes hurt a lot.
Yeah, fair enough.
But other than that, no.
There's nothing at all. So you fit part of this story. What you don't have is colleagues who haven't got the luxury. And I think if we're seeing now these measurable benefits, we can perhaps use the word luxury, although it might be a bit excessive. But you haven't got colleagues who haven't got the luxury of working from home, and you haven't got a boss who knows your life has improved but is ordering you back to the office anyway.
Well, no. There was a time when there were people who were saying, "No, I want people to come in person," and they still do exist, and I understand why people want them. And some people that I know who are also tutors have had to do that. Yes. I think because of the way that I work, it's just worked out really well for me, and I'm not trying to, that's obviously down to luck and down to, what's available resource-wise for me to do that.
Well, mate, you're perfect first call. And there it is, an absolutely crystal clear illustration of how it can improve a life, not just a life, but a work-life balance, a family, everything, financial situation, everything. And yet you are aware of employers who will be encouraging people in those situations to get back to the office and surrender all of those benefits that they've accrued. Brian in Chelmsford is close to some of it, I think, and it's a trick I've missed, and given how good I am normally at spotting this particular trick, I'm a bit embarrassed. He says, you're right, James, envy plays into it to an extent. Higher salaries and a 2 to 3 day a week working from home. Who wouldn't envy that? You can use your own kitchen, your own bathroom. You're free to do the school run. Compare that to working outside in the cold, eating in a van, struggling to find facilities, etc. It shouldn't be the case, but envy is a part. That probably makes me a bad person. Well, only if you start calling for them not to have it anymore. We all indulge envy occasionally, But if your envy involves wanting to take it away from them rather than just wishing that you could have it too, then I think you do become a bad person. And that, of course, is precisely the impulse to which the usual suspects are appealing when they pretend that they've suddenly discovered kinship with teachers and train drivers. They're trying to make you envy us to the point where you'll demand that the nice things get taken away from the other people because you haven't got them, which is how you can end up with people calling for public sector pensions to be treated with the same contempt for workers' futures that the private sector has demonstrated over the last 2 or 3 generations. Oh, in a mood like this, I can knit anything together. Amelia Cox is here with your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:32. I don't know, Alex, whether or not I've only got the second half of your message. But as I've mentioned a couple of times, there's so many messages coming in now. I'm going to start using Blue Sky, by the way, instead of Twitter. I don't know if you're on there yet, but it's impossible to go on Twitter for 5 minutes without coming away smelling of other people's excrement. So it's Blue Sky all the way for me now. I think we'll be putting the clips from the show up there soon, but you can find me on there. I've got the same name, Mr. James OB, but my texts into the studio, WhatsApps and texts into the studio, come in so quickly that it's hard to keep track of. So I don't know whether this is the second half of a message, but it's certainly intriguing. Alex has written, what made it worse was that on my day off, I used to see one of the solicitors going past my house on a horse when she was meant to be working. Alex, if there is a first half to that message, please send it again, and I'll probably miss it for the second time. But what does it make worse? What made it worse was on my day off, I used to see one of the solicitors going past my house on a horse when she was meant to be working. We're talking about hybrid work. And John, I don't know where you're coming from, John. I'm a truck driver. I hardly ever see my family. Can I please drive my truck from my living room on a computer? I'll be careful what you wish for, John, because drones will be moving into that space probably sooner than we realise. But does that make you resent people who are working from home? Because reading your message, I could detect resentment there if I was minded to, and I'd get it. But it's that beautiful distinction that Brian in Chelmsford introduced us to a moment ago between envy that is wistful as in, oh, I wish I could have that, and envy that is mean, as in, right, I haven't got that, and I can't have it, so I'm taking yours away. And that little point there just made sense of so much of the working from home debate in quotes, that I'd missed previously. Oliver's in Southampton. Oliver, what made you pick up the phone?
Afternoon, James.
Hello,
Great
Oliver.
conversation.
Thank you.
So I work, and I'm not going to say who, I work for one of the large UK manufacturers. So we have a massive workforce, which is, everything from people on the line where they make things to a big back office with lots of engineers to people who work fully remotely in all sorts of different...
Oh, you're perfectly qualified. Well, up to the point where you only do one job, so you'd need to do 5 of them to be perfectly qualified.
But I also work within the property team, so we deal with how do we create offices and environments for people to work in. And what I see is a lot of it comes down to personal manager preference and whether they are willing to empower their team if they are remote workers or can work from home to do it. I personally have a large team where we work from the office probably 1 to 2 days a week. Right. And, when we get together to collaborate. If you're coming to the office just to sit behind a desk and send emails, effectively you can do that from anywhere.
Yes.
And we do have a work from anywhere policy. Now, a lot of it comes down to how you measure output. And is it just, can I see people and are they working, or are you actually measuring the work they're outputting? But a real benefit for what I've seen is in the working parents sort of area, where people can do the school run, they can look after sick children. They could even say, well, in the past, I would have had to give up for childcare. Now I'm give up work for childcare, and that's males and females. They're able to hold down a full-time job because they can work around the school run and then work
the work
later in
moves
the
around the hours, and that's such a beneficial thing for everybody. Talk to me about tension.
So I think there's a tension between potentially people who are salaried and people maybe who are hourly paid. Okay. And hourly paid people are expected to be there doing their hours, and then when they go home, they go home. The salaried people often now are working in the evenings, or they don't get any more for when they put the extra hours in, but they're just expected to do it in the modern world.
That's a flexibility issue, right? Oh, I see. So if you're working on an hourly rate, you can't really work from home because you can't prove that you're working.
Potentially, I'm not sure if that is an issue, but it could be, and it may be interesting to see if there's anyone else that's got a view on this one.
What about? Is there anything between the people on the production line and the people in the offices?
Well, it's a bit like your truck driver analogy. If you've got to be somewhere to do a job, then that's the nature of your work.
Yes.
If you can do your job from anywhere, it's then about your output. But in the new world of connectivity, we're all generally I've got my work emails on my phone. I end up working sometimes on a Sunday evening. I don't get paid for it. You just do it. Yeah. And I think sometimes this is where it's the envy thing. People don't. You always want to be in someone else's shoes. So, I'd love to be able to go home at 5 o'clock and not think about work because I don't work on the production line.
Sure.
But equally, if I have the flexibility benefits, you are getting phone calls or emails 24/7.
Thinking about it, I wonder whether the government have got this right when they talk about flexibility and not letting people be contactable outside of working hours because of some of the realities that you describe.
I was told in Germany it's now against the law to have your emails on during holiday, and they've banned. They make companies turn off work emails when you go on annual leave.
And Germany is facing quite a few problems at the moment. I don't suspect that there's a link between the two, but that's really interesting. Just the difference between the hourly rate and the salaried rate. And oddly enough, and Oliver didn't know this when he rang in because I was reading out Alex's text about the horse. It makes sense of Alex's text about the horse because he sent in the first bit now. I knew that there was more to that story than met the eye. This is the first bit of the horse-based text that I read out a moment ago. I've now lost the second bit, so you'll have to rely on your memory for that. I used to work at a solicitor's, says Alex, who for some reason hates horses. Everyone worked from home during COVID. Then they made the admin staff and secretaries go back to the office full-time. I think probably the hourly rate people, to tie in with Oliver's point. But the fee earners can still work at home for 2 days. It made it feel like a 2-tier system. And then Alex said, to make it worse, I can do this from memory, some days I'd see a solicitor go past the office on her horse when she was supposed to be working from home. Except that she probably was doing the same amount of work from home, Alex. It's just that she was going for a little horse ride. and making up the time later. But yeah, if you're stuck at work thinking, oh, what time is it now? 12:39. I clock off at 1 o'clock. And then Keith goes past on a horse because he's working from... That's not fair. Get off your horse and drink your milk. Chris is in Coleraine in Northern Ireland. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting debate. I think a lot of companies are making decisions based on assumptions from data that they collect. So things like productivity data, engagement data, trust data. They collect that on an annual basis, and they'll have been looking at that through COVID, past COVID, and they're seeing things like productivity go down, engagement go down, trust go down. And I think it's really easy to look at things like the return to office mandate as a quick fix or a quick solution, because it correlates with that downward trend in those various outcomes. But the issue you have in a company context is companies don't often do controlled experiments. So, what would be sensible would be to say, okay, we've got two sales teams. We've seen morale go down in those sales teams. We've seen productivity go down in those sales teams. And that seems to correlate with a more flexible working arrangement. So let's bring one of those teams back into the office, and we'll monitor various outcomes that we're interested in.
Yes.
And we'll keep one maintaining that flexible arrangement. And then we'll see if there's been a positive effect by bringing people back into the office work environment. Now, that's not a perfect experiment. It's not like you're doing a double-blind trial.
But it's going to give you a better indication than most other options.
Exactly.
You're in HR, presumably.
Yes, I'm a HR consultant, but I've done a lot of...
so you're telling businesses to do this then, are you?
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
So the company that I spent the last 6 years working at, it specialised in improving the employee experience. So, the focus there was very much on let's figure out why employees are unhappy, and then try and use that perspective to have a positive effect on business decision making.
Hang on a minute, stay there. I'm just going to do that actually. In my I've got you here, and this is for free as well. Why are you so unhappy? Do you want to, Keith? Why are you so unhappy, mate? Mainly me. So, what do you do if it's just a boss-related issue, Chris?
Yeah, I think the boss thing's interesting. I've seen some recent data from a company called Gartner, which is a big research and advisory organisation. They say about 1/3 of business leaders would actually leave their current organisation if there was a return to office mandate imposed on them.
Wow.
So I think that binary discussion of it's employees versus leaders is a little bit simple.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Actually, it depends very much on the preferences that people have. So you could imagine business leader with a young family, formerly had to spend several hours a day travelling into and out of London. They can now spend more time with their family because they've got a flexible working arrangement. Compare that to another business leader who is under a lot of pressure, productivity in their team is down, they're not in a situation where they're prioritising their family life. Therefore, of course, they're more motivated to get people back in the office because they've got, frankly, no idea how to solve the problem that they're facing.
Oh, you're very good. I bet you're good at what you do. What's your working arrangement? Are you home or work or both?
I'm currently fully remote, so I live in Northern Ireland. Company I work for is based in London. I'm very privileged to. So
you live in a small castle with a moat in Northern Ireland because of property prices compared to what you'd be doing if you were near the office.
Yeah, working on the moat, but there is a river close by, so.
I like that. So it is a lot more nuanced. But just to clarify, one area of this you have cleaned up, which is that, albeit that the measuring, that the metrics may not be reliable, the reason why a lot of these companies are doing what they're doing is because they think that productivity is dropping among people who are working from home.
I don't know if they've got the split of people working from home versus people working from the office.
Generally.
But they know it's dropping, and invest.
So let's tinker with this. Let's change that. Because I'd have thought, and I'm not an HR consultant, but if my life has improved immeasurably working from home, you make me go back to the office, my productivity is unlikely to go up.
You would like to think that they would put a bit of
thinking into making that decision. But I think you mentioned Goldman Sachs, might have been another one of the big investment banks earlier. They will say, and I think I've seen the CEO talk about this. He says that we have an apprenticeship style system at our organisation. We learn from each other. It's a very collaborative, just in time decision making type environment. So I think there's probably some. There's probably some truth to that. I don't know if that CEO is pushing for this because he just wants to make people's lives worse. I do. You probably have to believe that
got to be a balance.
There is a genuine. Yeah, there's got to be some positive thinking in there. But I just think it's a really, really blunt object to solve a really, really complicated problem. And if they measure it properly, which they probably won't do because it's really hard to do, they won't see the benefits that they're expecting.
Beautifully put. I'm glad you were listening today. Why aren't you working?
I'm actually starting a new job on Monday. So,
12:45 is the time. So a few of you lecturing me on the difference between envy and jealousy, which is always welcome. It used to be one of my favourite points of pedantry. But I think you're lecturing me wrong. Jealousy is when you've got something that you don't want. I mean, literally, the old definition of jealousy is when you guard something jealously. You're familiar with that phrase. So it means you've got something that you don't want other people to have. What we're talking about is two different types of envy. Envy of something that you haven't got, that someone else has got. And there's benign envy, which is, flipping out, I wish I had that. Oh, lucky you. Oh, good luck. And then there's nasty envy, which is what you might call Daily Mail-inspired envy, which is, well, I haven't got it, so why should you? But as Chris has just explained to us, it's unlikely that the second impulse drives much of the employer decisions that are being taken. It probably just drives much of the media coverage of calls for people to return to work, because won't somebody who has never expressed the vaguest interest in the welfare of teachers or, for example, train drivers, suddenly starts championing their cause and encouraging them to hate the people who are allowed to stay at home?
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time. I don't know quite how we would handle this as a phone-in, but we should probably try. You remember in the early days of Israel's offensive against Hamas in Gaza, and then subsequently its unconscionable attacks upon tens of thousands of civilians, we would take calls from well-meaning supporters of Israel explaining to us what definitely wasn't going to happen. It didn't always go well, because I say supporters of Israel, we're all supporters of Israel, supporters of Netanyahu's policies in those regions. It didn't always go well because people would balk slightly at the question of how many people have to die before your mission will be accomplished, before Netanyahu's mission will be accomplished. And the suggestion of ethnic cleansing or annexation. And people were absolutely adamant that that was absolutely not on the agenda. And even to suggest so was deeply offensive and even perhaps anti-Semitic to suggest that. So it's a bit awkward that the far-right finance minister in Netanyahu's government, Bezalel Smotrich, has said in the last 24 hours that he's ordered preparations to annex the occupied West Bank, saying that he hopes 2025 will be, with God's help, the year of sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. So I don't know. And I mention how difficult it will be for people who were adamant that this couldn't possibly happen. Most of the media was complicit in that. Or no, most of the media was agreeing with that. There's no earthly way some of these worst-case scenario predictions could ever possibly come true. And to make those suggestions is disgusting. There was a lot of it about how on earth do you process the fact that it seems to be coming true? Answer, please God, no. You completely ignore it. You point the other way, you pretend it isn't happening. And that's why I suggest it might be quite a difficult phone-in for us to have. But for the avoidance of doubt, Israel's far-right finance minister has said that he has ordered preparations to annex the occupied West Bank, annex being something of a euphemism, and hopes that 2025 will be the year of sovereignty in parts of the Middle East that are not currently parts of Israel. So I don't know. Riddle me that. 12:51 is the time. Back to rather less fraught territory and the question of hybrid working, the new normal. There is envy. So, we've got people here who work from home, and it hasn't affected anybody's capacity or productivity in any way. It may have improved it. But you've just schlepped in. If you've had a really nasty commute, I don't know what your commute is like. Mine is so interchangeable. I kind of 10 minutes either way and the whole experience changes. I've told you before that I derive utterly irrational glee from what I call the kind of don't touch the sides commute. I walk out of my front door, I head towards the bus stop. As I turn the corner on the road where the bus stop is, the bus is if I turn the corner at exactly the right moment, I can watch the bus. I don't need to speed up at all. I can carry on walking at the same pace. This happens about 4 times a year. I should probably tell you when it does. I'm sure you'd love to know. And I walk towards the bus stop as the bus approaches. And without changing my pace, without breaking my stride at all, the bus doors open. I step onto the bus. I flash my card, flash my phone. I take my seat. And then the bus takes me to the station. I step off the bus. I walk through the gate at the station. I walk down the stairs as the train pulls in. The timing has to be right because I like to get off the train just by the stairs at the next day. And so it's possible to do it. On other days, I could be waiting 10 minutes at the bus stop and 10 minutes at the tube on the worst possible days. And I get a nice chair on the tube. I get a nice seat on the tube so I can play spelling bee or do the crossword. And you get to work on those days, you're golden. You get to work on when you've had the opposite experience and you think, I've got a colleague who's working from home. The envy kicks in. But is it nice envy or nasty envy? Nice envy is, I wish I could do that, but I can't. Nasty envy is, well, if I can't do that, then I don't want you to do it either. And if you're wondering how the Daily Mail has managed to sell so many copies over the years, the answer lies in encouraging that second impulse. Charlotte is in Stoke-on-Trent. Charlotte, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So we... our office is closed. I work for an NHS organisation, and I had my first baby in September 19, and I never have been back to the office since.
Okay. Timings worked a bit, didn't they?
Yeah, the stars aligned in that sense, yeah.
So why not? What's happened instead?
Well, it didn't start off too glamorously, actually. So when COVID hit, our office was kind of closed in March, and then I went back to work. Pregnant again in the June. So then all that time I was working from home, and I remember I would have to work on my son's high chair in between his meal times because I didn't have a professional office set up at home or anything like that. So fast forward a couple of years, we moved house. So I did have an office space to work from, and since that time, with the time I've kind of crafted not having to go to the office space, I've been able to set up my own side business as a saxophone player, performing at events and weddings.
Hang on, you can't do that from home.
I now work part-time and do that on the side, and it's just great alongside the family.
And you couldn't have done that if you were going into the office?
Absolutely not, no. I would
because it
never...
gave you the space and time to do it?
Yes.
That's a bit that's missing from this analysis. So everyone carries around a to-do list with them. I sometimes think, when I get into work in the morning, I must email that person and do that thing. And then I get into work and I'm too busy trying to carry the team to deal with my personal administration. So then I think I'll do it when I come off air. And then I think, I'm so exhausted from carrying the team that I'm not going to be able to do it now either. So whereas if I had no commute, if I had an hour... my life would expand to fill the space available, but I'd get more done.
Yes.
I like it.
And I'm huge into kind of working smarter and not harder. So it's just opened up a whole new a level of opportunity for me and our family, and it's just I'm so grateful.
And you get to spend extra time with the children. That's such a lovely thing, isn't it? There's no alternative for that, and you only get one go with each child. What sort of, do you want to advertise I don't know how many people listening are looking for a saxophonist in Stoke-on-Trent, Charlotte, but if you wanted to advertise your services, I'd be happy to help.
Yeah, so I have an Instagram and TikTok account. It's Mrs. Sax UK is my handle.
Very bold. Not Mrs. Sax Stoke-on-Trent.
No,
aim high, Charlotte. Aim high. Mrs. Saxophone. Today, Stoke-on-Trent. Tomorrow, the world. I love it. The saxophone is such a cool instrument. If I had any musical talent whatsoever, that would have been the instrument I wanted to play.
Yeah, and actually having the time to carve out during dinner breaks or when I don't have distractions from team players. Yeah, I wouldn't have been able to manage.
Happy days. There's another success story. I could squeeze in one more. Sean's in Catford. I've got about 90 seconds, Sean. What would you like to say?
Okay, hi. Well, I've been writing about this for a couple of years now as I write about the future of work and HR. I agree totally with the people you've had earlier that talk about productivity. I'd say there's no research whatsoever to support that productivity is going down because of hybrid work. In fact, that issue is all about control and leadership of control. But what I wanted to bring up very quickly was silent firing. This is the latest thinking around this because we've seen a lot more people putting in return to office mandates this year. And one of the debates out there, discussions that's going on is this all about companies encouraging voluntary resignation?
Oh, so they order everyone back to the office so that all the people who say thanks but no thanks can be taken off the payroll.
Absolutely. So they avoid all the legal and sort of reputational challenges that are associated with making people redundant. They reduce their headcount. So it's called silent firing or quiet firing. And there's some thoughts that because the tech industry,
I've had a couple of allusions. I've had a couple of allusions to that in my inbox without fully understanding what they were. Sean, I warned you we were short of time, but if people want to read more, of your work, where can they find it?
It's called The People Space, online, thepeoplespace.com.
And it's like a sort of HR workplace.
We concentrate on the future of work and the role of people in the future of work.
Well, read it myself, shouldn't I? Not just refer...
www.thepeoplespace.com.
Okay. Here we go. There we found a saxophonist and an online workplace HR organ in the last two calls. All human life is here, including Sheila Fogarty. It's just coming up to 12:59. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. I've run out of time. I can't bring you news from Maxime about Cadbury's chocolate fingers in France. I may hopefully have time for that tomorrow. Download it now for free. That's the Global Player, not Maxime, from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
Merci bien, monsieur. At 3 today, world leaders at the climate conference in Baku have been told to persuade people to eat less meat and travel less often. Keir Starmer says no. Is he right to? He says he won't be telling you either of those things. Is he right to take that approach? At 2, if the government focused its mission on economy and our borders as its 2 leading missions, what do you think? Do you think Trump or do you think the proper thing to do? Now, the Archbishop of Canterbury, for what it's worth, I don't think he can hold on to his job. His position tells us a lot about both church and society's attitude to the abuse of children. Are we still turning a blind eye too often? Once being too often.
James O'Brien on LBC.